Pokemon Volt White 2 Redux is by far the most difficult Pokemon game I've ever attempted to nuzlocke. This ROM hack made by Apexcubed and Drayano featured some of the most meticulously planned and deadly boss fights I've ever seen. And on challenge mode, even the first gym leader Charen has a full team of 6. This makes the early game insanely tight since you only get exactly 6 encounters before the gym, and losing any of those Pokemon in a hardcore Nuzlocke challenge means they'll have to be boxed forever. Or even worse, if I end up losing a battle, I have to go all the way back to the start of the game. And this happened a lot. The biggest source of my many resets in this game was this stupid plasma grunt. Before we take on Charen, we've got to fight this guy in one of the most brutal early game double battles I've ever seen. He's got Intimidate, Fake Out, and multiple ways to control speed. Because we're only able to get 6 encounters early game, we need them to beat both Charen and this plasma grunt. This makes the early game of Redux insanely hard and really frustrating. I ended up live streaming my first few attempts of the game before moving while I still had my live streaming set up, and this taught me exactly how brutal this game would be. On attempt 1, I got great encounters, but my Pansage instantly got crit by Growlithe and went down to an unlucky burn the very same turn. On attempt 2, my encounters were pretty pathetic, and my Carvana sadly fell at the end of the fight. It wasn't until attempt 3 that I actually beat this infernal grunt without losing a Pokemon.
We did it! We got past the most degenerate trainer of all time.
And attempt 3 ended up being an incredibly successful attempt, even making it past Charen to get ourselves some new encounters without losing a single Pokemon. But despite this, attempt 3 wasn't long for this world. My initial 6 encounters and the additional ones I could get before Roxie just weren't it. The meticulous planning I'd have to do for each of these boss fights was way more than I was prepared for. In my next multiple attempts, I couldn't get past the grunt, and I was thoroughly demoralized. It took me months to pick up the game again, but I never backed down from a challenge. Coming back to the game, I failed about 4 more attempts before realizing I really need to switch some stuff up. First of all, while Tepig is by far the best Unova starter in the base games, Oshawott is much better in this game with a buff to its ability now being Shell Armor. This means our little otter can't ever get crit, which is huge in a Nuzlocke since critical hits are by far the biggest reason we lose. From here, we face the big gamble that is the next 5 encounters we get before the gym. My first hit is Starly, which is incredible since it evolves at level 14 just before the gym. Our third encounter in Flotchessy Town is always the monkey that our starter is super effective against, so in this case the one that looks like somebody took a shit on its head. So far we've gotten some great encounters, and Route 20 certainly didn't disappoint with a shiny Bagon. To be fair, the game gives you a shiny charm at the very start of the game, but Bagon is only a 2% encounter on this route. As cool as this is, it's not actually that good, at least not right now. Bagon is obviously an incredible encounter, but as one of the first and only 6 Pokemon we can get to face both the Plasma Grunt and Charen with, we'd honestly be way better off with any of the other encounters on this route. Even so, I couldn't help but feel this was a good omen. We next head to this suspiciously shaped patch of grass in Flotchessy Ranch where I pick up a Machop. Our 6th encounter comes from an egg that we receive at Flotchessy Ranch. Apex has made the gates unique locations, so we can head back towards Aspertia City where we can hatch our egg in the gate to make it an eligible Nuzlocke encounter, being Magby. Most of my encounters were really good for Charen, but I was very worried about this Team Plasma Grunt, and rightfully so. This guy had just ended 15 out of 16 of my previous attempts. This time going into the fight, it was raining in the overworld, which is obviously a huge boost to my Oshawott and also nerfs Growlithe. I realized that I'd been biting off way more than I could chew with this fight, and that I needed a strategy to make things simpler. So this time, I made as good a plan as I could to turn this into a 2v1. Growlithe is a special attacker, so there's not much I can do about it. Instead, I target Mienfoo, first by making it drowsy with Yawn, and then lowering its attack and defense with Tickle. Growlithe then uselessly tries to power up his sleeping ally with a helping hand, giving me the chance to take it out with an Aqua Jet. Pansear just goes for another Tickle at the end of the turn to make sure that Mienfoo is as weak as possible for whenever it wakes up. Axew comes out next, so I have Lord Walder go for Disarming Voice to hit both of our foes super effectively. This does unfortunately power up Axew's payback, putting Pansear in range of being taken out by Rock Tomb. I really don't want to risk disarming farming voice missing the range and not taking Axu out, so I swap out into the Mountain. He ends up tanking the resisted Rock Tomb, and I go for another consecutive Fury Cutter for some good damage. Axu then goes for Endure, and Mienfoo finally wakes up going for Grass Knot, but oddly against the Mountain. Because Mienfoo just wakes up, my decision to take it out with a Water Gun really pays off, and a Seismic Toss from the Mountain takes Axu down to 1 HP. In comes Joltik, and if both Axu and Joltik attack Osha, she is dead, so I've got to swap out into Drogon, who amazingly doesn't even end up being the target of Shockwave. Axu then goes for Taunt before I destroy it with another Seismic Toss. I swap out of the Mountain into Viserys to tank the next Shockwave. At the end of the turn, Drogon goes for a Bite, and at this point, Joltik doesn't have any moves that can take me out with crit, which means I can safely stay in and take it out with a Bite Feint Attack combo. I'd done it. I'd managed to beat the Plasma Grunt without losing a Pokemon for the second time ever. It may have taken me several months to get here, but I was ecstatic, and the only preparation we can basically make for Cheren is bring the team up to the level cap, meaning Starly evolves into Staravia. Heading into the fight versus Cheren with a full team of 6, I knew I could make my way back to Roxie. Going into this fight, I basically have a counter for almost every single one of Cheren's Pokemon. All I need is a couple of Flame Wheels from Viserys to take out Porygon. Aipom is a little bit tricky since it's got a Water Gem boosted Water Pulse. However, with a quick switch to Asha, we don't have to fear any critical hits, and I can take out Aipom with a couple of Razor Shells. Lillipup is actually kind of dangerous, especially the first turn after one of his Pokemon faints, since Retaliate deals a ton of damage. I do risk a crit as I let Drogon tank the hit. I then swap out into the Mountain to do a bit of damage with a low kick as Lillipup starts setting up with Workup. However, this is all part of the plan since it makes Retaliate deal a ton more damage, thus powering up my counter to finish Lillipup off. As Doduo comes in, I swap into Viserys, and things get a little bit too close for comfort as I misclick and go for Mach Punch instead of Flame Wheel. However, it's not as scary as it looks since we would have taken that quick attack before Flame Wheel anyway and can just finish off Doduo the next turn with a Mach Punch for the exact same result. Munchlax is the easiest one to beat since he's so heavy that a low kick deals enough damage to just one shot. Cheren's final Pokemon is Deerling, and we haven't even sent in our flying type yet. A simple wing attack into quick attack does enough damage to finish the job, getting us our very first gym badge. At this point, I was starting to get nervous because our encounters are not the best for Roxie. In this game, there are certain NPCs that'll just give you starters from the previous generations. And in Burbank, we can pick up our Kanto starter. Charmander is obviously the best for Burgh, but it's basically just a luxury for people who already have an insane Roxie team. Wartortle gets Rapid Spin, but Bulbasaur just being a poison type and thus able to get rid of Toxic Spikes is definitely what I'm going with. It unfortunately doesn't learn Leech Seed before the level cap, making it a lot less useful than I'd hoped. I next head to Burbank Complex to pick up my encounter, and there's a lot of really good stuff we can get here. And the Steel-type Magnemite is a perfect addition to the team. Now, before we fight any gym leader, we've got the option to fight the Hoenn gym leaders, and if you beat them before the next gym, you end up getting pretty awesome rewards. However, there's no way we can risk losing Pokemon to Brawly. Even though beating Brawly would get us a Metatite egg, doing so would probably require us to lose several of our Pokemon, which we really can't afford. Roxie's got a number of really annoying tactics. The first pain to deal with is her exploding Trubbish that sets up Toxic Spikes. If you let these things poison all of your Pokemon, she's gonna do double damage with Venoshock, and it's basically game over. So my plan was to use the turns that Trubbish set up Toxic Spikes to deal damage and take it out with an Aqua Jet. She then sends in Coughing, and because I know I'm never gonna get crit, I decide to go for a Razor Shell to hopefully get a defense drop, but instead of getting lucky, I of course just get confused by Psybeam. Unfortunately, this is a pretty bad spot for me since I really need to get rid of Toxic Spikes before I do anything else, but I know I'm switching my poison type into a Psybeam. Outside of Trubbish, Roxie has no more ways of setting up Toxic Spikes. She does, however, for some reason have Lava Plume on her Coughing, so I swap out into Viserys. Because we got rid of the Toxic Spikes and aren't poisoned, Venoshock does just barely less than half. This way, as we get Coughing into the red with a couple of Flame Bursts, we're able to survive 2 Venoshocks and get rid of the Eviolite Coughing with a final Flame Burst. Predictably, this brings in her Quillfish, which has priority Aqua Jet, so I've got to swap out into the Mountain. The Mountain, unfortunately, can't really do anything here, and I'm basically just using him as a pivot to get a safe switch into something else. Sorry, Sir Gregor, you're the one that's gotta go. With our first death of the attempt, I was starting to get pretty nervous. My team really isn't the best for Roxie, and after my initial strategy to take out Trubbish and Coughing, I was basically hard steering with almost no plan whatsoever. Ivysaur is at least specially tanky enough to tank a couple of Venoshocks from Quillfish and finish it off with Magical Leaf. This brings in the big bad Whirlipede. Ivysaur can't outspeed this thing, but I really wanted to try and keep Ivysaur since if I can get it to learn Leech Seed, it's going to be one of the most useful members of my team. And because I still have Walder in the box, I decide to sack Viserys to try and save Ivysaur. My plan to take on Whirlipede basically came down to Magnemite. I figure we'll be fine since Theon resists all of Whirlipede's moves, but that Steamroller did a massive amount of damage. After paralyzing it, Whirlipede tries to get some of its speed back by going for Protect into Speed Boost. However, I'm still able to outspeed it the next turn, going for a Charge Beam that boosts my special attack. Whirlipede then goes for another Steamroller, doing 13 points of damage, leaving me at 14. I'm risking a crit by staying in, but I need to deal as much damage as possible, and a +1 Charge Beam takes Whirlipede into the yellow. And unfortunately, it doesn't get fully paralyzed, taking me down to 1 HP. After the next speed boost, Whirlipede unfortunately outspeeds, so I've got to switch, and at this point, despite my best efforts to try and keep Ivysaur alive, it's unfortunately gotta go to get me a free switch in. The only Pokemon I have at full HP is Sweet Robin, and frustratingly, an Aerial Ace just isn't enough to take Whirlipede out, giving it the chance to take me down to just 4 with an Endeavor. Roxie still has Ivysaur and Ghastly, so we've basically lost the fight since an Aerial Ace can't take Ivysaur out in one hit. With a critical hit, Sweet Robin had possibly just single-handedly saved the attempt. Roxie's final Pokemon is Ghastly. I really can't afford to switch in Duat or Magnemite here, so I just go for Aerial Ace, which doesn't quite get the KO. You may have saved the run, buddy, but not enough to save yourself. Ghastly may be faster than Duat, but we do have the priority Aqua Jet, easily taking out Ghastly's remaining HP, and finally picking up our second gym badge. However, despite this being the furthest I'd ever gotten, I was seriously considering resetting. 2 of our Pokemon survived, and we've only got Drogon and Walder in the box. But before throwing in the towel, I should really check my pre-Burgh encounters. The only thing standing between us and going to Castelia City is a fight versus Bryson. However, our team has a Steel type, Fighting type, and a Fire type. This means I could easily wall his Ice types and deal a ton of damage back. Even his most threatening Pokemon, Cryogonal, which tries to get you with that increased crit rate Night Slash, basically got completely countered by Asha, who can't get crit, and easily took it out with a Power-Up Punch Aqua Jet combo. This means we finally get to go to the big city, and what encounters we get here really determine if we can continue the run. I start by continuing the story and head to Castelia Sewers, where my encounter is Zubat. Getting a Flying type here is huge, and possibly the most impactful encounter I could have gotten before Burgh. I next head up the stairs to Castelia Garden, where my encounter is Snubbull. While this thing doesn't exactly help us with Burgh, it does have Intimidate, which could help us get something that would be really good against Burgh. Now, while I didn't get Eevee as my encounter, you can still talk to this lady to get any evolution stone you need, getting us the Firestone required for evolving Pansear. Through the sewers, we can also reach Relic Passage to get another encounter. There's a lot of good stuff we can get here for Burgh, and the most likely encounter in a Dust Cloud is Rhyhorn. We don't really want to gamble with a regular encounter, and while I didn't get Rhyhorn, Diglett is still an amazing encounter despite not being a rock type. Finally, we can head north of the city to pick up one more encounter on Route 4. The best scenario here would be getting a Darumaka, but I'll certainly take Sandslash. After getting all of our new Pokemon fully evolved, I decide to take a quick detour to Liberty Garden. Here we're able to take on a double battle that's been added into the game, and if you beat this guy before fighting Burgh, you're able to go into the lighthouse and capture Victini. The catch here is of course that this is an incredibly optimized and difficult fight, but I tackled this fight pretty much the exact same way I took on the Plasma Grunt. My utmost priority was charming and intimidating Bouffalant to lower its attack to -3. From there, I tried to switch around to dodge as many super effective moves as possible, taking out the Pokemon I could on the way. I really didn't want to lose Crobat to a Psybeam before the gym, and with nothing to swap into a Psybeam, I decided my best bet was to just send in Brienne to get another Intimidate on Bouffalant, which sadly cost me my Intimidator. This does, however, give me the chance to take out Musharna with a Poison Fang and put the poor Bouffalant out of its misery with a Bulldoze that won't hit my Flying type. This just leaves our guy with his Shedinja, which requires me to hit it with 2 super effective hits due to a Focus Sash, and while this fight did cost me a good Pokemon, the new encounter it opens up for us is more than worth it. Victini is a mythical Pokemon with base 100 to all of its stats. The fact that it's a Fire type and thus insane against Burgh is the cherry on top. Perhaps Gramble would be great for Drayden's Dragon types, but that's so far in the future that I don't even know if I'm gonna get there. The short-term gain of getting a crazy good Fire type just before Burgh is certainly worth the trade-off. If you thought Roxie was bad, Burgh is where things start to really go crazy. This is a double battle, making it more than twice as arduous to prepare for. On top of that, his intimidating Masquerain is now a water bug type, meaning it's not quad weak to rock. After Intimidate, I need to double attack into Masquerain to take it out, unless Elena just gets a critical hit. Crobat would have outsped Masquerain after Excel Rock regardless. The only difference here is that Mothim takes a ton of damage instead of being at full health. Even a critical hit Electroweb, which is probably the worst thing Mothim could have done to me, wouldn't have been that big a deal. What is a big deal, however, is Vespiquen coming in second with another Intimidate. This means my Mons now have their attack cut in half, so I definitely have to switch, opting to swap out Crobat for Osha. The best use of my time here is just knocking Mothim out with a quad effective Excel Rock, since it'll definitely KO even at half attack. This way I only have to take Vespiquen's attack, and because Duat is a fighting type in this hack, the resisted hit barely does any damage. I'm now baiting Leaf Blade from Leavanny, which definitely KOs even without being able to crit, and I instead barely take anything from the quad resisted hit. I then go for Bulldoze, since at -2 attack, I'm barely gonna deal any damage with anything regardless, but this way I can lower Leavanny's speed to guarantee that I can outspeed with Crobat the following turn. It's also a really convenient way to break its focus sash, so I'm guaranteed to take it out without leaving it at 1 HP. Another way to get around the attack drops is to just go for Super Fang, which is guaranteed to take out half of Vespiquen's health no matter what. Escavalier comes in next and it's got Razor Shell, so I've got to switch my Sandslash out and send in Osha. Crobat then goes for another Pluck, taking out Vespiquen before it gets to make its move. Finally, Osha tanks that Razor Shell and Burgh sends out Heracross. I really don't want to risk losing Osha here, so I swap out to Walder, who I'm much more comfortable losing. Heracross goes for Helping Hand, which is gonna make Escavalier hit like a truck. This was probably Heracross's best move, since otherwise it would have just been outsped and taken out by the quad effective Pluck. I was fully prepared to just lose Crobat here since we're about to win the fight, but Littlefinger actually manages to survive despite the scheming between Escavalier and Heracross. Because I'm steering, I make a massive mistake here. I should have just attacked with Crobat to get some damage with Pluck, since the reduced damage from Fire Punch would have easily put it in range of the KO. Instead, I risk losing Walder to a Razor Shell, which I'm very surprised he actually survived. Ironically, I put so much effort into getting Victini for this specific battle, and I end up beating it deathless without ever sending in Victini. Before leaving Castelia City, I go to pick up my Johto starter, and my favorite is of course Chikorita, and with the fairy type in this game, it's an excellent choice. The new level cap even allows us to immediately evolve it into Meganium. It also gets us Magneton, which is a pretty big improvement from Magnemite. We then have a quick encounter with Colress, which our Victini and ground types easily take care of. He gives us a Life Orb after the fight, which is by far the best item we have up until this point. We then have some encounters to pick up, first at Desert Resort, where I find a Sandile. I then head to Relic Castle, where I find a Baltoy, and at this point, I'll take any ground types I can get with an Electric Gym coming up. We're investigating allegations of illegal trade taking place here. I guess the broken stuff I was hoping to pick up in Join Avenue would have been too good to be true, huh? The first thing I do in Nimbasa is take the train to Anvil Town, where we find the clown that gives us our Hoenn starter. In this case, all of them seem like good choices, but I go with Mudkip since Swampert is good against both Elesa and the upcoming fight against Clay. I then prepare by getting all my ground types to the level cap before it's time to face my old arch nemesis, Leader Elesa, and this fight takes it up to the next level once again by being a triple battle. However, I came with a plan. Elesa loves to go for Discharge to boost up her other Pokemon with her abilities, so I figure if I put my Crobat right in the middle of the battlefield where it could get hit by every single Discharge, Elesa would go ahead and spam it, which is pretty much what she does, except for a Muddy Water from Lantern. Crobat gets out of the way by going for Fly at the start of the turn, and because I've got ground types on either side of Crobat, I can go ahead and spam Bulldoze without fear of hitting my own Pokemon. This of course doesn't hit Emolga, and Electivire survives by holding a Shucca Berry, but Lantern gets completely obliterated. Elesa sends in Raichu, and I expect it to go for an extreme speed to try and get an easy kill on Elena. So I make a switch to Theon to resist it with my Steel typing and barely take any damage at all. Crobat then connects with that Fly we used last turn, which immediately destroys Electivire since it's part fighting type. Emolga can't hit Swampert with Energy Ball, instead trying to kill Sandslash and just dealing minimal damage to Theon. Swampert ends the turn with an Aqua Tail since Raichu has an Air Balloon, which we pop and take it all the way into the red, as Elesa then sends out Zebstrika. Ironically, because I've brought so many ground types, I don't really have any good switches for Swampert since it's most likely gonna get hit by Grass Knot from Raichu. I decide to send in Krokorok to intimidate Zebstrika, and after Littlefinger flies into the air, the Intimidate makes it so that I take less damage from high horsepower. Sadly, this slight damage reduction to Zebstrika's power output is not going to stop Oberyn from getting killed, something I unfortunately can never unsee. But hey, if you want to do something more productive with your thumbs, you can always thumbs up this video. RIP Oberyn Martell. To end the turn, Theon takes out Raichu's remaining health with a tri-attack, which leaves Elesa with Stun Fist. I send out Damphair to replace Oberyn and then swap out a Theon into Hodor. The idea here is to try and bait a ground-type move from Stun Fist with my Magneton and then try and dodge it with Hodor's Levitate. And this plan ends up working out beautifully right after Zebstrika gets nailed by a fly. At the end of the turn, Damphair goes for Bulldoze, which of course doesn't hit our flying type, dealing a ton of damage to Stunfisk and finishing off Zebstrika. Because of Tailwind, I can't stay in with Littlefinger since I'd be outsped and destroyed by discharges, so I swap out into Elena, who just completely dodges both of them. This one switch basically just gives me a free turn to hit a Mulga with an Ancient Power and to take out Stunfisk with an Aqua Tail. We then once again have to swap out of Elena since she's super dead to Energy Ball and send in Theon to resist it. Another Ancient Power isn't quite enough to take a Mulga out from there, so I just used a third the next turn to pick up our 4th gym badge. We did lose a Pokemon, but I felt in control the entire time, and it's our best battle so far. With the new level cap at 45, almost all the Pokemon we catch from this point on can be fully evolved immediately. The first new one I catch is on Route 16, and we can't actually get very many great Pokemon here, so I decided to just go into the Shaking Grass to catch myself an Audino. Being a fairy type, this thing could be useful in and of itself, but catching it eliminates it from the encounter pool because of Dupe's Claws, making Shaking Grass a lot more viable to try and get rare encounters. I then head to Route 5 where I catch myself a Blitzel, which is pretty useless against Clay. What isn't useless against Clay though is my encounter on Driftvale Bridge, obviously Ducklet. The Clay tunnel that's normally blocked off until a post-game is available for an encounter in this game, and I end up finding a Laron, which is quad weak to ground, so that's not exactly ideal, especially since Clay is by far the most brutal gym fight we've seen. On the surface, it looks like a team full of really strong Pokemon, but this fight is fought in a permanent sandstorm, making his Swords Dancing Sandrush Excadrill an Avengers level threat. That being said, we've got a really decent lineup here, with Swampert, Swanna, and Meganium hitting ground types super effectively, and both Claydol and Swanna who aren't affected by ground moves. You might be confused why I brought Magneton, who's quad weak to ground, but it's for a very good reason. To start the fight, I lead with Meganium, who's holding a Miracle Seed to boost our Energy Ball's power as much as possible so that we're able to one-shot Seismitoad despite the Rindo Berry. I did end up getting a crit, but that would have KO'd regardless. With Meganium being a fairy grass type in this game, Nidoking sees a KO with a quad effective Sludge Wave, which is exactly why we brought Magneton to be able to dodge it and then bait the ground move for a safe switch into Bran. The Three-Eyed Swan easily outspeeds, and despite only having Bubble Beam, we're able to take out Nidoking with the help from our Life Orb. Torterra comes out next, and this thing's holding a White Herb to reset stat drops from Shell Smash. But that just means it isn't holding a Yache Berry to reduce the damage of Ice-type moves, meaning we easily knock it out with a quad effective Icy Wind. Excadrill is next, and with Sandrush, we are very easily outsped here, so I swap out into Hodor to tank an incoming Rock Slide, which just ends up missing. I was really hoping Claydol could hold the door a little bit longer, but a critical hit takes it out immediately. If Claydol would have just dealt a little bit of damage, Swampert would be in a great position to take Excadrill out here. Instead, as Excadrill doubles its attack to go alongside its doubled speed, my Hammer Arm doesn't quite take it out. Despite being at +2 attack, the only move that can take Swampert out in one hit right now is Earthquake, so I can safely swap in Bran, and with Life Orb, Aqua Jet actually takes Excadrill out from that range. That's one crisis averted, but we still need to deal with Garchomp. Before that, we face Mamoswine, which is holding a Pasho Berry to reduce the damage of Water-type moves, but I need to get rid of it to get the KO next turn. Sadly, this comes at the cost of Bran, who served his purpose, defeating half of Clay's team. But eventually, winter always comes, in this case in the form of Icicle Crash. We do unfortunately have to risk a crit against Swampert here, who takes over half from an Earthquake, after which we take out Mamoswine with a Hammer Arm, which has its accuracy boosted by a Wide Lens. Finally, there's only Garchomp left, and with both of my ground immunities knocked out, I have no choice but to just let Swampert go to an Earthquake. I could have sacked something else, but Magneton's Steel typing and Dugtrio's insane speed are probably going to be more useful in the long run. Meganium is the perfect switch in here, since we resist both Earthquake and Brick Break. We're completely immune to Dragon Claw, leaving Garchomp with extreme speed as its only option. So I poison Garchomp and start spamming Synthesis to whittle it down with poison damage over time. After a couple turns of that, I figure my best bet is just reducing Garchomp's health as much as possible, so I go for a neutral Energy Ball, which doesn't quite put it in range of being taken out by poison. It does, however, leave it in range of just one more turn of poison, so I swap out into Theon to not risk an extreme speed crit, letting the poison do its thing at the end of the turn to collect my 5th gym badge. Before leaving Driftvale, I make sure to pick up my Sinnoh starter, and while they're all really solid choices, I end up choosing Chimchar. With Iron Fist and access to both Thunder Punch and Fire Punch from the local move tutor, Infernape is instantly one of our strongest Pokemon. We then reach Mistralton Cave, where I was really hoping to pick up a Dino since it's the only place where we can get it, but we end up getting Axew, which is still a really good Pokemon. Our next stop is Chargestone Cave, where we can get a lot of good stuff, namely electric types, but I'm not complaining about Ferrothorn, even though it doesn't match up great against the next gym. While I'm in the cave, I also make sure to level up Magneton to get our fully evolved Magnezone. From there, I pick up a few more encounters before the gym. First on Route 7, one of my favorite Johto Pokemon, Aipom. There are so many good things we can pick up in Celestial Tower, and Elgyem is just not one of them. Also, what in the world am I facing, Colress, and why can't I own this Pokemon? I want a robot Tyranitar that's too big to fit on the screen. I can certainly live without Wally here, though. What the actual f— Just like Elesa, Skyla is a triple battle, and unfortunately, we don't have quite as many electric types as I was hoping to have. We've only got Magnezone and the Blitzel I caught on Route 5, but at least we've got Thunder Punch on Infernape, who is able to outspeed Jumpluff by doing a little bit of EV training in the early game to make sure we outspeed and knock it out with one Fire Punch. I've then given the Life Orb to Jamie to make sure we outspeed and knock out Pidgeot with one Volt Switch, which also allows us to swap out so we don't get hit by Gliscor's Earthquake. Despite it being quad effective, we don't take too much damage with Euron because of Filter. Both Euron and Barrack are at risk of being crit here, but I really didn't see a good way of playing around that since triple battles are so chaotic. Playing this way, while risky, also lets us hit an Avalanche at the end of the turn to knock out Gliscor in one hit, which takes out all of Skyla's first 3 Pokemon in the very first turn. This brings in Aerodactyl, her Togekiss, and Ace Swanna. Barrack is very likely to immediately get completely destroyed by Aerodactyl, so I swap out into Olena and outspeed everyone with Littlefinger to immediately erase Togekiss with a Cross Poison. Aerodactyl of course goes for Earthquake, which doesn't do too much to Olena, and Euron tanks it because of Filter, which ultimately doesn't matter since he then goes down to a Hydro Pump. I really wish I would have brought someone like Samurott instead of Dugtrio, so I had something to swap into there instead of just having to lose a Pokemon as good as Aggron, since it would have been great against Drayden. After Olena breaks Aerodactyl's Focus Sash with an Excel Rock, I go for a Cross Poison on Swanna, which almost takes it out. In hindsight, I think it would have been way better to send in Dugtrio instead of Jamie to go for a Sucker Punch on Swanna so I don't get Hurricaned at the end of the turn. Aerodactyl has no way of one-shotting Dugtrio at full health anyway, so it would have been much safer, and I would have still had both Sandslash and Zebstrika. This just goes to show that despite the hundreds of hours I've spent Nuzlocking, there's always so much more to learn, and in games like this with complex battles like triples, I'm always humbled and reminded that this game is very complex. But despite my slightly sloppy battling, I managed to take out Swanna the next turn to collect my 6th gym badge, meaning my 3 best girls take me on a trip on their private jet all the way to Lentimus Town, where I head towards Twist Mountain and pick up a Skarmory. I also head to the spooky house where I was hoping for a ghost type, but Kirlia is not a bad pickup. After a couple of hours of carefully planning teams to take on all the trainers in the cave, I pick up my encounter in Undella Town, a female Frillish. I then head to Route 14, where I'd love to get a Mienfoo, but I end up pulling the most common encounter, Swablu, which isn't bad either. Before we get to Opelucid City to fight Drayden, there's a number of things standing in our way, the first of which being a multi-battle versus Zinzalin, which won't cause us any trouble whatsoever since Barrack can basically just sweep through his entire team of ice types. What I'm really worried about is Alder's grandson Benga, who we normally would only have to fight in the post-game, but here we have to fight him on Route 12 before we can reach Village Bridge. And this guy's got a lot of Pokemon we could lose the run to, like a Swords Dancing Garchomp, Dragon Dancing Gyarados, or Quiver Dancing Volcarona. He likes dancing, what can I say? So what was my strategy to avoid getting swept by this guy? Well, I had to bring back an old friend. Benga's lead Metagross has Iron Fist, which could do some insane damage. But thankfully, I still have our early game savior, Lord Walder. With a wide lens, I've got a much better chance of connecting with the Will-O-Wisp TM that I picked up in Celestial Tower. After the burn, Metagross basically can't deal any meaningful damage to Walder, so I take it out with a couple of Blaze Kicks. Garchomp comes out next, so I switch to Bloodraven and use Counter a couple of times to take it down into the red. After the second counter, Bloodraven would go down to a crit Stone Edge, so I really didn't want to risk it and send in Osha, who of course can't get crit at all. From there, I don't even need to be faster to take Garchomp out with a priority Aqua Jet. This brings in Benga's Gyarados, which only has Stone Edge, Waterfall, and Power Whip as its attacking moves, all of which are resisted by Tyrion. As Gyarados wasted its time dancing, I basically just set up Leech Seed and Stealth Rocks, and proceeded to set up with Curses to just take as little damage as possible from this thing while it gets stalled out with Leech Seed. Benga's Emboar is nuts. With V-Create, it's got the strongest damaging move in the game. Tyrion would of course be reduced to nothing but Ash if I stayed in, so I swap out into Rhaegar and easily knock out the Emboar with an Earthquake after the defense drop from V-Create. This brings in Volcarona, which is why I set up those Stealth Rocks with Tyrion. This way, I don't have to deal with it setting up on me with Quiver Dance and can simply take it out with Earthquake, leaving just Conkeldurr. It ends up going for Mach Punch as I switch, but if it would have gone for any other move, it wouldn't have been safe to send in Victini here, so sacrificing Walder was my best play. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I was actually really sad to see Simisear go. It does mean that we don't risk getting hit by a knockoff or Facade as we swap in Melisandre and can simply finish off Conkeldurr with a stab super effective Psychic for the win. I've racked up so many deaths throughout this run, and I can't believe Simisear is the most painful one. I at least get to replace him with an Azumarill I find by Village Bridge that's got Thick Fat, which is basically sadder than losing Simisear. To prepare for Drayden, I start by evolving Altaria, who's a fairy dragon in this game. I also level up Gardevoir, after which it's time to reintroduce Drogon to the team and fully evolve him into Salamence. Beyond our myriad of fairies and dragons, I also make sure to bring Ferrothorn, who resists dragon with its steel typing, and I make sure to bring my Technician Ambipom since it's got Fake Out, which is invaluable in double battles. Drayden leads with Latios and Charizard, which is a fire dragon type in this game. Intimidate kind of works against me here since it boosts Charizard's attack due to Defiant, but that's not going to matter since after faking out Latios, I use a Wide Lens boosted Dragon Rush to instantly knock out Charizard. Drayden brings in Haxorus, which I expect is either going to try and take me out with Outrage or knock out Arya with a close combat. So I swap out of Salamence into Altaria to make sure we don't get hit by any dragon moves, and I use U-turn on Latios to not only take it out, but also swap out and switch places with Drogon to get off and Intimidate. This means I basically take no damage at all from the resisted close combat, and Haxorus just lowers its own defenses. Fourth out is Drayden's Flygon, which I decimate immediately with another Dragon Rush. This way, I don't have to deal with it Quiver Dancing, and at -1 attack, Haxorus is only able to take out Drogon if it gets a critical hit Outrage, which ends up randomly targeting Altaria anyway, so I don't take any damage and further reduce its attack with a Feather Dance. Sceptile comes out 5th, and with its Focus Sash Unburden combo, I definitely need to swap out of Salamence and send in Tyrion. What's beautiful about this is Sceptile breaks its own Focus Sash without using it on Tyrion's Iron Barbs. Haxorus basically wastes the turn by going for Swords Dance to get itself back up to -1 attack, which I immediately reduce to -2 by attacking both of these physical attackers with a Breaking Swipe. With their attack lowered, I'm not even really afraid of super effective attacks, so I let Sceptile attack Tyrion with a Drain Punch to get a little bit of HP back, and I allow Viserion to take a Cross Poison since I'm not dead to crit anyway. I then nerf my opponents further with another Breaking Swipe and set up Leech Seed on Haxorus. At this point, Viserion is dead to crit Cross Poison, so I have to swap out into Salamence, who further reduces our opponent's attack with an Intimidate, which basically makes Drain Punch do nothing. Salamence then tanks the Cross Poison, which doesn't even get a crit, and Tyrion sets up rocks for the Salamence in the back. I don't want to risk getting crit by a dragon move here, so I swap out into Viserion, who just dodges both of them. I then make sure to knock out Sceptile with a Heavy Slam, and watch as Haxorus goes down to Leech Seed. This means Salamence is the only Pokemon Drayden has left, so I swap into my own to both Intimidate and eat the incoming Flamethrower, after which I go for a Breaking Swipe to lower Salamence's attack, and the overcautious approach of sending in Caitlyn to trace Salamence's Intimidate to further reduce its attack, as well as dodging an incoming Dragon Claw to finish the job with a Moonblast. After the gym fight, the world gets attacked by Team Plasma. So as Drayden destroys grunts with his Haxorus, I decide to follow his lead and do the exact same thing. Once I destroyed Zinzalin, it's basically a straight shot to Marlin. But before fighting him, I decided to do something I've been avoiding up until this point. Like I told you about Brawly, we've had the option to fight Hoenn gym leaders before every single gym. You get some decent rewards for fighting a lot of these guys, but in the latest version of the game, the rewards just haven't been overwhelming enough that I wanted to risk my Pokemon against the earlier gyms. That's been true up until now. We need to fight these guys for the reward. And thankfully, I had a great selection of Pokemon to basically completely counter these guys. What makes this fight pretty easy is that the two sides count as different players, kind of like in a multi-battle, meaning once we took out 3 Pokemon on one side, it was just a 2v1, at which point it was incredibly easy to just swap out my left side to continuously have fake outs, eventually resulting in a very easy deathless victory. And beating these guys is the only way to get the TM for Protect. And considering the final gym battle and 3 of the 4 Elite Four battles are double or triple battles, I don't think I even stand a chance without the TM for Protect. The fight versus Marlin is like Clay, where we face permanent weather, except in this case, 4 out of his 6 Pokemon have their speed doubled by Swift Swim. I knew I wasn't going to be able to brute force this, so I baited fighting moves into Ambipom while going for Will-O-Wisp to burn Poliwrath. Turn 2, I'm hoping Ludicolo goes for Focus Blast again and that we see close combat into Beheeyem, but Ludi switches it up and goes for Hydro Pump, which thankfully misses. Poliwrath then tries to get some damage with high horsepower, which barely does anything because of the burn, while Ludicolo switches its target to Shay with a super effective Giga Drain that ends up getting disabled by Cursed Body. I then strike back with my own Giga Drain against Ludicolo since I really don't want to take out the nerfed Poliwrath. This gets me some health back, and I end the turn by hitting Ludi with a Psychic that doesn't quite take it out, but puts it in range of its own Life Orb. The next turn, I thankfully manage to avoid a Lovely Kiss, but Gilly isn't quite so lucky and gets destroyed by a Hydro Pump. Beheeyem is kind of an expendable Pokemon, so this isn't the end of the world, and it thankfully takes out Ludicolo because of the Life Orb as well. Thanks to not being put to sleep by Lovely Kiss, I'm able to go for a cover at the end of the turn, getting all the way back up to full HP. Marlin sends out Starmie, which I immediately flinch with Fake Out. Unfortunately, Shay doesn't get to take it out with a Giga Drain since it's actually put to sleep with Lovely Kiss this time. The next turn, Poliwrath goes for high horsepower, which barely does anything to Shay and ironically disables the move. Because Starmie is one of the 2 Pokemon on Marlin's team that doesn't have Swift Swim, I'm able to outspeed with Arya and just U-turn out. I send in Tyrion, and Shay actually ends up waking up and going for Giga Drain to destroy the Poliwrath. Taking out Poliwrath probably wasn't the wisest thing here, since I now had to face 2 full-powered Pokemon instead of 1 being nerfed. Kingra's Hurricane against Shay barely does anything and thankfully just gets disabled. Caliper hits Shay with a Hurricane as well, doing about the same amount of damage, and I unfortunately miss my Will-O-Wisp against Kingdra. Leech Seed does connect, however, meaning I at least have some residual damage. Because it's disabled, Kingdra has to go for Flash Cannon next, which barely does anything at all. Shay then recovers up to full before Tyrion gets hit by a massive Hurricane that unfortunately gets the confusion. Despite that, I actually managed to set up my Stealth Rocks, which is great since the Kabutops in the back has a Focus Sash. Because he's confused, I obviously need to swap out of Tyrion, sending in Bloodraven, who immediately dodges a Muddy Water, which, despite the Water Gem, barely does anything to Shay. I then actually managed to land Will-O-Wisp, which doesn't actually nerf Kingdra since it's a special attacker, but it's just further residual damage at the end of the turn. Shay has no problem tanking a Hurricane, but unfortunately, she does get confused, so I'm forced to swap out once again, sending in Theon. I protect with Bloodraven, but unfortunately, all their moves are targeted against Theon, so I've got to swap out immediately again. This way, I can swap back into Shay, who's no longer confused. This turn, both Kingdra and Pelipper go for Muddy Water to hit both of my Pokemon, which is a combination that almost takes out Skarmory. I do have a berry to get back a little bit of HP, and Leech Seed always helps. At this point, Kingdra's gonna go down to burn at the end of the turn, so I protect with Bloodraven and recover up most of my health with Shay before it goes down at the end of the turn. This brings out Marlin's final Pokemon, Kabutops, which immediately has its Focus Sash broken by the rocks. However, I run into some terrible luck as Shay gets crit by a Rock Slide, taking her down into the red and then getting flinched. So instead of recovering back most of my HP with a Giga Drain that would take out Kabutops, she gets taken out by Pelipper's Muddy Water alongside Skarmory. This just goes to show that even when you do your calcs to show that you survive, you run into the worst possible luck you could have as a punishment for playing carelessly. I fake out Kabutops to make sure it doesn't hit hit me, but Pelipper goes for Hurricane, dealing massive damage to Tyrion, and worst of all, getting the confusion. All I need is for Tyrion to break through confusion and connect with the not perfect accuracy power whip, because if it doesn't, we're probably losing even more Pokemon. Thankfully, we end up hitting it and don't have to deal with Kabutops anymore, meaning we can start the next turn by taking out Pelipper with a Thunder Punch to claim our final gym badge. But even though we have all 8 badges, we're still a long way from getting to fight the Elite Four. Before Victory Road, we've got to deal with Team Plasma in the Giant Chasm. Now, I thought I could get cheeky and capture Terrakion with my Master Ball, but Apex has stopped you from doing that in a Nuzlocke with level cap since it's higher level than the final level cap. Sorry, Terrakion, you would have been great. There's a ton of encounters we can get in Giant Chasm, but we have a better chance of getting a good one if I just try to get something out of Shaking Grass. Because of Dupe's Claws and the fact that we already have the most common encounter, Audino, this guarantees that we get one of the other 2 encounters we can get in Shaking Grass, which is either Clefable or Piloswine. What I'm really worried about is taking on Ghetsis, because we've got a lot of great answers to Colress. His lead Behem gets instantly decimated by a fake-out U-turn combo from Arya, which I use to swap in Littlefinger, baiting in Rotom. This way, Rotom either goes for Will-O-Wisp or Volt Switch, both of which are fine as we send in Rhaegar holding a Rostberry. Then with Mold Breaker, we completely ignore Levitate and just take out Rotom with Earthquake. Rhaegar then picks off Porygon Z as soon as it swaps in, and I send in Tyrion to deal with Metagross. I simply set up Leech Seed and Stealth Rocks and just stall this thing out of existence. Kling Klang then becomes another victim of Leech Seed, as well as Magnezone, neither of which have any moves that really do anything to Tyrion. Horus was basically completely free, but that's not the Team Plasma fight I'm worried about. Before fighting Ghetsis, we need to take care of White Kyurem. To do so effectively, I needed to train Caitlyn with a very specific amount of EVs. With her speed boosting nature, we don't need that much speed to make sure we're faster. I needed even more special attack EVs to make sure that a super effective Moonblast is enough to take Kyurem out in one hit, which I even needed a Life Orb for to guarantee that it kills every single time. Ironically, all of my EV training to guarantee the KO gets completely invalidated by just getting a crit, but with Kyurem taken care of, we now have to take down Ghetsis. With the Life Orb, we can deal a ton of damage with a super effective Shadow Ball against his lead Cofagrigus. Unfortunately, the thing is super bulky and manages to set up Trick Room, thus allowing it to outspeed the following turn and hit me with a super effective Hex. I then finish it off with a Shadow Ball, which brings in Ghetsis' Machamp. Because of Trick Room, I'm in pretty big trouble here, so I swap out into Tyrion to tank the incoming Stone Edge. I know I can take one Dynamic Punch, so I take the turn to set up Leech Seed and just face tank the Dynamic Punch, which is guaranteed to hit me because of no guard. The most annoying part about Dynamic Punch is that you get confused, which is why I gave Tyrion a Person Berry before the fight. This way I can guarantee a Protect the next turn and get myself back up above half HP with Leech Seed. I only had one Person Berry, so unfortunately I can't just get rid of confusion as I get Dynamic Punch with Littlefinger. So I've got to switch out again, this time sending in Tyrion, who can use another Protect to fully stall out Trick Room. Annoyingly, whatever I switch in after Tyrion gets confused by Dynamic Punch, so my best strategy is just switching between Tyrion and Littlefinger, who both get back more health from Leech Seed than they lose from the attacks. Electros is next, which hits me hard with a Drain Punch before I'm able to set up Leech Seed. I then go for Protect and swap out of Tyrion and send back in Littlefinger. Baiting an Electric type move, I outspeed and go for U-turn to once again swap in Tyrion and continue stalling with Leech Seed. After Iron Barb's damage and Leech Seed, Electros is dead to another turn. Unfortunately, Electros does get a critical hit here, recovering quite a lot back from Drain Punch, so it doesn't simply die to Leech Seed. Ironically, I'm not even able to take it out with U-turn, instead taking itself out on my Iron Barbs. Ghetsis' fourth Pokemon is Gyarados, which we can pretty much perfectly wall with Tyrion. We basically just set up Leech Seed again, protect every other turn, and eventually Gyarados goes down. This leaves Ghetsis with his two most powerful Pokemon, starting with Genesect. Downloading a special attack boost makes this thing extremely dangerous. However, even with the special attack boost, it doesn't have a move that can one-shot Melisandre. Before I incinerate the bug with a Fusion Flare, Ghetsis now only has one Pokemon left, and Melisandre just learned Glaciate. So for the win, I launch the Ice move, and it just barely isn't enough. I had been steering for most of this fight, and I don't know why I didn't calculate this specific move. I just figured this would obviously take it out, ice against the dragon. But no, I of course get punished for not doing what I should have been doing. And while Victini ironically wasn't super useful in most of the gym fights, especially Burgh, there are a ton of really strong mandatory trainer fights on each route, and Victini was instrumental in making a lot of those super easy. And I've lost to some unknown trainer not once, but unknown? Clearly you're not one of the awesome 343,000 people who internationally recognize me as Miss Unova. With Team Plasma defeated and all 8 badges collected, we'd normally be preparing for the Elite Four. But in Redux, Lance has decided to round up his own Elite Four at the end of Victory Road. We've got to beat a Hail and Sun trainer back to back, then we're allowed to change our team if we want to face a Rain and Sand team once again back to back. And like every Elite Four, there's got to be a champion at the end, and Lance has appointed himself. On normal mode, you don't have to face them all, but on challenge mode, it's non-negotiable. And what makes these fights so difficult to prepare for in particular is the fact that they're back to back. Not even the actual Elite Four of the game is back to back, so I needed to pick my team and movesets wisely. I decided to lead with Ambipom since it instantly takes out Abomasnow, and I think it'll be a perfect lead against Sun. A double U-turn combo lets me take out Reuniclus and swap in Infernape as Cloyster comes in. This basically spells the end for the Hail trainer since I can just close combat both Cloyster and Vanillux, outspeed and take out Jinx with a Fire Punch, leaving just Weavile. Weavile is Focus Sash, so I decided to just switch to Tyrion to break it using my Iron Barbs. Then after pretty much unnecessarily setting up Leech Seed, I swap out into Osha, who of course can't get crit, guaranteeing my victory with a close combat the following turn. Because Hail is by far the weakest weather in the game, and Ice the weakest type in the game, I knew this fight would be super easy. So basically what I did is plan the fight versus the Sun trainer and backwards engineered how I could use those exact Pokemon to beat Hail. The very first thing I do against the Sun trainer is set up Rain Dance with Arya, and then immediately hard switch into Osha since Torkoal is holding a red card. This does mean I need to tank a Solar Beam on the switch, but because Osha can't get crit, it really isn't a problem, and I take Torkoal into the red with a Waterfall to swap myself out with red card. That Waterfall was arranged to KO, but I'm really not too afraid of what I could have swapped in, and because Torkoal decides to go for Solar Beam, I just set up my Stealth Rocks, which leads me to some of my more reckless play during this challenge. Before the fight, I forgot to give Tyrion a 100% accurate attacking move, so I'm stuck going for Power Whip, which misses the first time, and a critical hit there could have easily cost me my Ferrothorn. Darmanitan comes in, and this thing is super dangerous. Nothing on my team wants to take a Fire Gem boosted Flare Blitz, not even Osha, since she can't outspeed and would just be dead to Earthquake the next turn. My strategy here certainly isn't foolproof. Drogon is able to outspeed and take out both Darmanitan and Ninetales with Earthquake. I then do just a little bit of gambling. Both Victory Bell and Venusaur could take Drogon out with a critical hit Sludge Bomb, but I kind of expect them both to go for Growth to try and guarantee the KO. This way I can go for a Wide Lens boosted Fly to take them both out with 99% accuracy, and Volcarona is the entire reason we set up those Stealth Rocks with Ferrothorn earlier, so that we don't have to deal with its Focus Sash and can outspeed and finish it off with Fly. Preparing for 2 fights at the same time is very difficult, but seeing how sloppy my fight versus the Sun Trainer was, I knew I needed to be a little bit more rigorous. Rain and Sand are by far the strongest weather strategies, and losing Pokemon this close to the Elite Four is just not an option. With Technician and Stab, Fake Out deals a ton of damage, putting Pelipper in range of a Thunder Punch despite its Wakan Berry. Arya is the perfect Pokemon to deal with here since she baits in Politoed due to its Focus Blast. However, Politoed is much more likely to go for Hydro Pump, which would have taken Arya out unless I set up the Sun. Hydro Pump is both more accurate and stronger than Focus Blast, so there's no reason why Politoed shouldn't go for it. Once I set up the Sun, Hydro Pump of course does 4 times less damage, so I easily survive and U-turn out into Rhaegar to take the Focus Blast. This means I've defeated both of the Rain Trainers, Weather Setters, and Kingdra doesn't have Swift Swim, so I easily outspeed and knock it out with a super effective Dragon Claw. Just like versus Clay, we've got to defeat a Seismitoad, and this thing Ice Punches me on the switch, which would have been fine if it crit, but a freeze could have been a really big problem. Just like Clay's, this thing has a Rindo Berry, but with Leaf Storm and Miracle Seed, we easily knock it out in 1 hit. Next out is Electrode, going for Bug Buzz on the switch so I can swap in Arya and go for a Fake Out. Since I don't outspeed, I swap out into Osha as the Electrode goes for Thunder, and thankfully it misses. The reason I say thankfully is I calculated this Aqua Jet damage as if there were rain for some reason. The second Thunder misses as well, but Electrode really isn't that strong a Pokemon, and even with Aftermath, I would have survived since I can't get crit. Against Scizor, I swapped Drogon into a Psycho Cut, which doesn't do much after Intimidate. I get some Leftovers recovery, and seeing that Scizor wants to go for Bullet Punch, I know I can survive and just go for a fly, dodging the second one. A second fly then takes out Scizor, and with that, I win the battle, launching me straight into the fight versus the Sand Trainer. And while this fight is versus the strongest weather, it has by far the lowest stakes. Sure, we need to keep our Pokemon alive that'll be good against Lance, and in general, I had to do a little bit of thinking about what Pokemon I'd like to bring to the Elite Four so that I don't lose them. I risk a crit as I set up the Sun with Aria, and then U-turn out. An Earthquake would have been fine here, but I end up dodging an Ice Fang and then set up Leech Seed. I make sure to set up Stealth Rocks as I'm just stalling with Leech Seed, and finally finish a Powdon off with a Power Whip. His Garchomp has Flamethrower, so I swap to Drogon to resist it, and then finish off the Garchomp with a Dragon Claw. Nidoking comes out next, but I'm faster than this thing too, and Earthquake is enough to take it out in one hit. When Tyranitar comes in, it annoyingly sets up the sand again. We still haven't beat Excadrill, putting us in pretty grave danger. I set up Leech Seed with Tyrion, and because I see Tyranitar going for Crunch, I swap out into my Fairy-type Meganium to outspeed the next turn with a Draining Kiss, knocking out Tyranitar and getting myself back up to almost full HP. I'm okay with Pycelle getting crit here since I really don't need it for the Elite Four, but since I don't, I just end up surviving and knock out Excadrill with a single Leaf Storm. Finally, there's Clefable, and I've got a lot of dragons and fighting types on my team, so I just go for Leaf Storm to deal as much damage as I can before letting Pycelle go, which I was willing to do against Excadrill. From there, it's a simple Fake Out U-turn combo, and I'd completed the Weather Gauntlet. Sure, it cost me one Pokemon, and it's a Fairy type just before facing Lance, but with only 2 more fights before the Elite Four, I had a lot of Pokemon in the box, one of them being Mamoswine. I also brought my pretty much useless thick fat Azumarill, because I wasn't gonna let this corrupt murderer they call Champion of Johto get away with anything else. Theoretically, dealing with some of the strongest dragon types, which is one of the strongest types in the game, should be a huge problem. But throughout attempt 17, we've collected some of the most effective dragon slayers out there. Ambipom easily takes out Aerodactyl, and while I could outspeed and U-turn against Haxorus, I don't want to activate Red Card, so I just hard switch into Drogon. This works out perfectly since a close combat on the switch allows me to take Haxorus out after the defense drop. Gyarados comes in, but I gave Drogon Thunderfang for this exact occasion. Despite Lance's Salamence not having Intimidate, I wasn't sure if I could outspeed, so I swap out into Asha, who unfortunately just doesn't deal very good damage without huge power. So I switch again, first into Tyrion to get 2 Iron Barbs procs as Salamence goes for dual Wing Beat. This baits a Flamethrower, so I can easily swap in Viserion, who after the Flamethrower can take 2 critical hit dual Wing Beats if he needs to, and then finish Salamence off with a quad effective Ice Beam. Ironically, I end up swapping in Tyrion as Lance sends in Charizard since I'm expecting an Iron Tail. Baiting the Fire move gives me a safe switch into Drogon, and I can finish off Charizard the next turn with Dragon Claw. Viserion swaps into an Outrage and goes for Parasong after being hit by extreme speed. After protecting, I simply swap to Tyrion, go for another Protect, and watch as Dragonite's health gets drained by Parasong. I didn't even need Mamoswine. Once we beat Lance, there's one final rival fight before we get to prepare for the Elite Four. I end up losing both Azumarill and Mamoswine in this fight, but I wasn't gonna bring them to the Elite Four anyway, so it's fine. After we defeat Hugh, he gives us the HM for Dive, and with that, attempt 17 had made it to the Pokemon League. Before taking it on, I decided to go to places to pick up encounters I hadn't gotten yet. The most impactful location is Lost Lorn Forest, where if we can get a Murkrow or Mismagius, that is huge. Both of them would be great for the Elite Four, and is that a male Combee? Are you serious? What the f? Instead, I had to rely on the Pokemon I'd already picked up. In the Pokemon League, we've got to face the hardest 5 fights in the game. One of these fights is a triple battle, and 2 of them are doubles. This makes preparing for the fights insanely difficult, especially since there aren't that many triple and double battles in regular Pokemon games. I knew I was going to need Aria for her Fake Out utility, and fast heavy hitters like Barrack and Littlefinger were going to be my main damage dealers. Being able to swap into hits is going to be super important, so I brought some defensive Pokemon like Viserion, who can dodge dragon moves with his fairy typing, and Tyrion resisting so many types with Steel, and the ability to set up Leech Seed is going to be invaluable. Finally, I only have 1 Intimidator among all my encounters, and given the chance to use a shiny Salamence, how could I pass up on bringing Drogon? The time had come to do or die, and I was really uncertain about my chances. What I was most scared of going into the Elite Four was losing Pokemon early and not being able to fulfill my plans. Since I was most scared of the triple battle versus Shauntal, I decided to take her on first while I still have all of my Pokemon. Her Sableye was one of my biggest concerns. I didn't know if it was going to go for priority Will-O-Wisp or just Trick. I made sure to give Arya an Expert Belt so that the Sableye would rather trick it than Littlefinger. I also made sure to send in Burgh, who's holding our Life Orb, all the way to the left so that we can't get tricked. This way, even if Sableye goes for Will-O-Wisp against Littlefinger, we've got enough damage to take out Miss Magius, which we have to double attack into because of its Focus Sash. As you can see, after knocking out the first Pokemon, we get all of our Mons up to level 79. We have to be at the level cap of 78 before entering the Elite Four, so this was just a good way to get as much of an advantage as possible. Arya takes out Gengar with a Shadow Claw at the end of the turn, and Shauntal then sends out Golurk and Jellicent. I figured Burgh would be a prime target for either a high horsepower or Scald here, so I decide to send in Drogon, who can dodge both of them very effectively. Drogon's Intimidate also lowers Golurk's attack in case it wants to attack Littlefinger with Ice Punch. We really can't afford to be hit by that though, so I make sure to go for U-turn, targeting Jellicent to deal a little bit of chip damage and swap out into Tyrion. We need to make some very specific swaps here before we knock out more Pokemon, since Chandelure will lock in whatever we have out with Shadow Tag. Notably, Drogon is just barely able to survive a critical hit here if Icy Wind were to crit. This way, we were never taking a risk swapping it in. After Tyrion barely takes any damage from Iron Barbs, I connect with an Ice Punch to take Golurk below half HP. From here, we're baiting another Icy Wind, so I swap out Drogon the next turn and send in Burgh. We'll also probably be targeted by an Ice Punch, which we can easily tank because of the Intimidate. Tyrion getting burned here basically doesn't matter, since we just need it to set up Leech Seed, tank hits, and for a very specific purpose later on in the fight. Here we see Golurk go for that Ice Punch, which barely does anything to Burgh. Tyrion then sets up Leech Seed, which isn't exactly necessary, but we need it to not go for Protect this turn so that we can use it next turn. Arya then moves last because of the Lagging Tail and finishes Golurk off, which sends in Chandelure. This is why we needed Protect, since Tyrion baits a Heat Wave from Chandelure, which our other Pokemon can easily tank due to the spread damage. Sableye ends up burning Arya, which isn't really a problem since we don't need her damage output. I then go for Thunder Punch, and this is why we couldn't have our Life Orb stolen by Sableye, since we need it to one-shot Jellicent. We then see Heat Wave from Chandelure, which we obviously dodge with Protect, and Arya manages to just avoid it. Burgh is completely safe here, even from a critical hit, and Arya ends the turn with a Shadow Claw, which wouldn't have gotten the KO even without the burn. I start the next turn by immediately Shadow Clawing Chandelure with Burgh to take it out, which basically wins us the fight. At this point, we basically just need to take out Sableye, and with Leech Seed, it's only a matter of time. After Iron Barb's damage, a Power Whip and Ice Punch puts Sableye in range of being taken out by Leech Seed, and you cannot believe how relieved I was to beat this fight without losing one of my Pokemon. That was one of the most stressful things I've ever done in a Pokemon game. With Shauntal defeated, we've got 2 double battles and a single battle left to face, and I decide to take on the single battle versus Grimsley first. This is where I feel the most in control, and if I can get a few levels before the double battles, that would be great. He immediately leads off the fight with his ace Crocodile, which, despite having Intimidate, can be taken out by a close combat from Burgh as long as I'm holding a Life Orb. This baits in Honchkrow, which can take me out with a Brave Bird, so I U-turn out into Tyrion to tank the hit. Now expecting the quad effective Heat Wave, I can swap back into Burgh, and you might be wondering why I didn't just stay in and go for Thunder Punch in the first place, which is simply because Thunder Punch wouldn't have taken Honchkrow out at -1 from full HP. Sharpedo comes out next, which I was expecting to go for Protect here to get its speed boost, but without the speed boost, I'm actually just naturally faster and can U-turn to take it down to its Focus Sash, bringing in Tyrion to tank what I expected to be a Waterfall. Unfortunately, I guess I was in range of close combat too, which means I risk a crit as I swap out into Tyrion. I thankfully don't get punished for missing that, and Iron Barbs takes care of the Sharpedo. Grimsley sends in Drapion, so I swap out of Tyrion, who's at pretty low health at this point, and send in Drogon. Now, you might be wondering why a Drapion would be going for Flamethrower against my Ferrothorn, since Drapion can't learn Flamethrower. And the simple answer to that is that this isn't a Drapion, it's actually Grimsley's Zoroark. He then brings in Tyranitar, which is a huge problem since this thing has a Chople Berry. Since I wasn't expecting to get hit by close combat with Ferrothorn, that's what I wanted to switch into, and I was really hoping to get Ice Punched here, but Arya manages to dodge the crit. To already be steering this early in the Elite Four feels very bad. I start by going for Fake Out to get a little bit of damage before U-turning out. This is a risky switch since Tyranitar could go for any move because they all could take me out. The only thing I'm really afraid of swapping into Viserion though would be a critical hit Ice Punch, and thankfully Tyranitar just goes for Stone Edge. I then just outspeed with Moonblast and take care of the Tyranitar. Finally, we have to deal with the actual Drapion, so I swap out into Drogon to lower its attack with Intimidate, and things get really sketchy when Drapion sets up to +1 with Swords Dance. I'm not going to be able to take this thing out with one Earthquake, so if it gets a critical hit, it's over. Between Sniper and high crit moves, I was worried, but Drapion just gets greedy and sets up a second Swords Dance. That was a run-defining moment, and Grimsley just threw away his chance to send me back to the start of the game. But even so, there's still a good chance that still might happen, especially since we now have to face the two most difficult double battles in the game. I decided to take on Marshal first since our team is slightly better equipped to handle him. I of course lead with Arya to be able to use Fake Out, and both Salamence and Hitmontop lower everyone's attack. Because we can get faked out by Hitmontop, I decide to fake it out so that Salamence is free to go for dual wing beat and take out Infernape. I've given Drogon a wide lens to increase our accuracy to 99%, which isn't perfect, but it's as good as it gets. Despite the Intimidate, we still knock out Infernape, which brings in Lucario. Drogon is actually just barely able to survive a non-crit Ice Punch from Lucario, so I'm expecting both of Marshal's Pokemon to double team with fighting moves into Arya. I use U-Turn to send in my Fairy type and also get some chip damage on Hitmontop. This small amount of chip doesn't actually matter, but the Fake Out we used last turn matters a great deal since it means we can take out Hitmontop with dual Wing Beat despite its held Citrus Berry. Viserion then tanks the close combat, which lowers Lucario's defenses, and Marshal sends in Toxicroak. Toxicroak could go for either Poison Jab or Icy Wind here. I protect in case of the Poison Jab and then take out Lucario with Brick Break, which I can do because of that defense drop, even though Drogon is still intimidated. Toxicroak does end up going for Ice Beam instead of Poison Jab, which is the worst of the two outcomes, but Drogon can't ever be taken out here by a critical hit, and we don't much care about the speed drop. Marshal sends out his Conkeldurr next, and this thing has Poison Jab too, so I swap out of Viserion and send in Tyrion. The reason it doesn't matter if Drogon loses speed is I'm just going for Protect the next turn anyway to dodge an incoming Icy Wind. Drogon then protects itself from the incoming Rock Slide, and I swap out the next turn into Viserion. Tyrion doesn't need to dodge this, but I managed to avoid a Drain Punch because of Bright Powder. I wasn't dead to Drain Punch crit anyway, so it didn't really matter, but it certainly makes the fight a lot more consistent. The next turn, I'm expecting Altaria to get hit by 2 Poison Jabs, so I just Protect, which lets me set up another free Leech Seed against Toxicroak. Expecting more Poison Jabs, I swap in Littlefinger this time to tank both of them. This gives me a free Power Whip against Conkeldurr, which takes it down into a range where Leech Seed finishes it off at the end of the turn. If Marshal's Breloom wasn't holding a Koba Berry, I could have easily just knocked it out here with an Acrobatics, but instead I deal a bit of damage to it with a U-turn and swap out into Arya. Toxicroak then Icy Winds for some minimal damage, and Rock Tomb makes Arya extremely slow. Without much to do, Tyrion just Power Whips here, which compounds with the damage from Leech Seed. I really only sent in Arya to bait a couple of fighting type moves so that I can send in Viserion and tank them easily. Unfortunately, I just end up missing my Power Whip here, but at least I get some more damage from Leech Seed. Viserion then dodges a Poison Jab by protecting, forcing Tyrion to tank some damage from a Technician boosted Mach Punch. I then actually connect with my Power Whip and finish off Toxicroak. This means we now only need to deal with Breloom, which is pretty annoying since we can't Leech Seed it due to its grass typing, and it immediately puts Altaria to sleep with Spore. Because Breloom is 100% gonna Mach Punch Tyrion, I decide to swap in Barrack and Drogon to easily tank that resisted Mach Punch and finish off the fight with a close combat. It was another great relief to win this fight without losing any Pokemon, but I still had one more double battle to face before I could say I'd at least made it to the champion of Redux. The final Elite Four battle is versus Caitlyn, and just like Marshal, this fight is a double battle. Since Generation 1, Psychic has always been one of the strongest types in the game, and in Gen 5, it's no exception. In this game, Musharna's a Fairy type, so I start the battle by going for Cross Poison, which boosted by Life Orb is just enough to one-shot Musharna. I then go for U-turn against Slowbro, but this U-turn isn't intended to swap me out. Instead, ironically, it switches out Slowbro because of its held eject button. The combo here is that Slowbro gets some of its health back with Regenerator. This causes Caitlyn to send in Gallade and her Zen mode Darmanitan. I need to swap out both my Pokemon, but since they're faster than Caitlyn's, I can just go for U-turn, which was just intended to do some chip damage against Darmanitan, but the purple squad end up getting 2 critical hits, taking Darmanitan deep into the red. I use my switches to swap in Tyrion and Drogon, which lowers both Gallade and Darmanitan's attack with Intimidate. I made sure to swap Ferrothorn into the Crobat slot to tank the Psycho Cut. Darmanitan then connects with its resisted Focus Blast, which does a ton of damage because of its insane special attack, but not enough to threaten to kill with crit. I'm now baiting Heat Wave from Darm, and I just have to risk the crit. Gallade doesn't get to attack me since I can take it out with my Wide Lens boosted of Dual Wing Beat. Tyrion, of course, doesn't take damage because of Protect, but Heat Wave does more than half of Drogon's remaining health, meaning I would have been dead to crit. It's possible even Burn would have taken me out at that range, so that was a very risky play. I'm expecting both Slowbro and Darmanitan to try and take Tyrion out, so I swap out into Altaria and protect with Drogon. Drogon ends up protecting a Psychic, and I take the Fire Blast with Viserion. I know Altaria is faster than Darmanitan, so there's no risk sending in Barrick and just finishing off Darmanitan's remaining health with a Moonblast. Barrick then comfortably takes an Ice Beam, and Caitlyn sends out her Xatu. I'm baiting Psychics with my Monkey, so I immediately U-turn against Xatu to break its Focus Sash, and as I swap in Tyrion, my Bright Powder once again works out dodging the Air Slash. Viserion then goes for Perish Song to put Caitlyn on the clock, and Slowbro hits Tyrion with a resisted Psychic. With Tyrion out, both of my foes are guaranteed to go for their fire moves, so I simply protect with Tyrion and take out Xatu with an Ice Beam. You might think this defeats the purpose of the Perish Song, but it was mostly there to defeat Slowbro anyway since it's so incredibly bulky. Caitlyn's final Pokemon is Metagross, and this thing is a huge problem. I swap in Barrick to take Slowbro's Fire Blast here and protect with Viserion to not immediately die to Meteor Mash. I then swap Viserion for Tyrion and U-turn out of Barrick so that I don't get Psychicked. I send Viserion back into this slot since it's my special defensive tank, and instead of going for Meteor Mash, Metagross sets up Trick Room. Slowbro's Perish count then reaches 0, and it gets taken out at the end of the turn. Finally, we only need to deal with Metagross, which is a lot easier said than done. Ironically, because of Trick Room, I get to set up Leech Seed before Metagross moves. Unfortunately, I don't have any good swaps into a Meteor Mash here. My best bet is to just send in Barrick and hope it doesn't get the damage roll, but who am I kidding? I knew it would happen eventually. Barrick gets crit and completely destroyed by an attack he would probably have died to anyway. He may have the Lord of Light on his side, but you can't come back from dying in a hardcore Nuzlocke. Without all my Pokemon, I'm not sure I can beat the champion, but I wasn't just gonna give up because we stumbled slightly on the finish line. The truth is, a lot of the Pokemon in this fight came out in an order I wasn't expecting, so I was steering for most of the time. Metagross, unfortunately, doesn't go down to Leech Seed after my Fake Out Power Up combo, so I have to risk the life of Littlefinger. I get to attack first in Trick Room, but Tyrion misses. Thankfully, Meteor Mash is not 100% accuracy, and Littlefinger gets to live to see another day. All I had left were 5 Pokemon and a dream. Champion Iris is the final fight of the game, and thankfully, this is a single battle. She leads with a Dragon Grass Superior holding a Yache Berry to not get screwed over by ice moves. However, even with the damage reduction from the Yache Berry, a quad effective move still does a ton of damage, so I just need to deal a bit of chip with Fake Out, putting Superior in range of an Ice Punch despite the reduction from the berry. With the playing field more even, Iris sends out Alakazam. This thing is sashed, and I don't want to get Focus Blasted out of existence, so I go for a U-turn, which immediately brings Alakazam down to its sash and lets me swap out into Littlefinger to resist the Focus Blast, but Alakazam just sets up its special attack with Nasty Plot. This makes no difference whatsoever since I just outspeed with Cross Poison the next turn to finish off Alakazam's final hit point. Empoleon comes out third, so I go for U-turn for a bit of damage and swap in Tyrion. Agility is basically a wasted turn here since Empoleon would have outsped Tyrion regardless. Ice Beam does a decent amount of damage, but we're gonna heal a lot of it back up by just going for Leech Seed. I then protect the next turn before tanking another Ice Beam as I set up my Stealth Rocks. My plan to just continue protecting every other turn until Empoleon goes down gets halted by a freeze. This changes my plan from going for protect every other turn to just sitting around frozen every single turn until Empoleon eventually falls to Leech Seed. This brings in Dragonite, which is why we set up the Stealth Rocks to break its multiscale. With Dual Wing Beat, Dragon Claw, and Fire Punch, Viserion basically tanks this thing's entire moveset. So while a single Ice Beam isn't quite enough to take Dragonite out, Viserion is more than capable of tanking even critical hits from this thing and taking it out the next turn with another Ice Beam. In comes Togekiss, and with Viserion at such low health, I was worried it would go for Air Slash and then crit my Crobat if I switched, so I just let Viserion go here to get a safe switch into Littlefinger. This way, a Life Orb boosted Cross Poison the next turn is guaranteed to take Togekiss out, leaving Iris with only her final Pokemon, the legendary Latios. Even with all the speed in the world, Littlefinger can't outrun this jet plane dragon and gets instantly destroyed by an Esper Wing. We're so close, but nothing on my team can outspeed this Latios. The only way I have to hit it first is sending in Arya and going for Fake Out. It does a good amount of damage, but the only way I can use Fake Out again is if I swap out. I send in my Frozen Tyrion, who at this point is basically useless. However, by surviving an Aura Sphere, he actually ends up providing some further value. Because it takes 2 hits for Latios to take Tyrion out, it deals 20% to itself with Life Orb, putting it safely in range of Arya's Fake Out. And while it's certainly not the way I expected this story to end, Arya lands the final blow, and with only 2 Pokemon remaining, I'd done it. Somehow, despite losing Barrack to the final fight of the Elite Four, the rest of the team managed to take us all the way to the Hall of Fame. And this was by far the hardest Nuzlocke I've ever played in my life. All the countless hours I spent just swapping out team members to beat random root trainers, this multi-month challenge is what's tested my patience the most out of any video I've ever made. So if you want to see more hard challenges like this, maybe Radical Red Hardcore, possibly Run and Bun, let me know in the comments below, and that's what we'll do as soon as I'm ready to stream again. But until then, I can't believe I get to say that this is how I beat a Pokemon Volt White 2 Redux Hardcore Nuzlocke.